Good evening. The Multimedia Museum of the New Chronology continues its meetings with the founders of the New Chronology. Today, we have with us the academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Professor of Moscow University Anatoly Fomenko. We will talk about the origins of the scientific theory, the New Chronology. Good evening, Anatoly Timofeyevich.
Hello, Svetlana. Thank you for the introduction. I am very pleased to address those who are listening to us today. I hope we can tell you about the very beginning of our research on chronology.
Anatoly Timofeyevich, why in the early 1970s did you, a successful scientist, a renowned mathematician, and a professor at Moscow State University, decide to delve into history, a science commonly considered unrelated to mathematics?
I should probably start from a long time ago. When I was in school, and later in university, of course, I had courses in history. Outstanding historians taught us various courses on the history of the Middle Ages and antiquity. These courses were at the Faculty of Mechanics and Mathematics, and it was very interesting. I want to say that I never had any a priori skeptical attitude towards the ideas about ancient and medieval history. At the same time, some facts bothered me. I was always puzzled by the strange effect of revival in the current version of medieval, ancient, and general ancient history. Supposedly, in the distant antiquity, science, art, and culture reached the highest level. Ancient astronomers knew a great deal about the structure of the universe. They knew that the Earth is a sphere and that it rotates around a central fire. Moreover, ancient astronomers had learned to roughly calculate the distance from our Earth to the central fire. People studied the movement of stars and various events associated with comets and supernova explosions. The famous Almagest of Ptolemy was created, an immense encyclopedia. Supposedly, it was compiled around the 2nd century AD. This encyclopedia covers many aspects of ancient astronomy. It is a magnificent work with a wealth of information. A star catalogue was compiled, featuring over 1,000 stars with coordinates, latitude and longitude. The measurement of these coordinates required highly sophisticated instruments. The work on creating the star catalogue was very challenging. According to historians, this splendid understanding of the universe was later forgotten. The onset of Dark Ages began somewhere around the 3rd, 4th, or 5th centuries AD and lasted until approximately the 10th or 11th century AD. During this time, not only in Europe, but also in other countries, including Asia and China, the great achievements of antiquity were forgotten, and the understanding of the universe regressed to a Stone Age level. The famous Cosmas Indicopleustes, a medieval chronicler and scholar, envisioned the universe in the following way. The Earth is flat, and from the center of the Earth rises a high mountain. The Sun and Moon revolve round this mountain. When the Sun goes behind the mountain, night falls. When it emerges, day comes. The entire universe is inside a box. The box is cubic, with stars drawn on the lid and walls. and we live on the bottom of this box. This representation of the universe by the scholar Cosmas Indicopleustes is truly childlike. After the ancient astronomers, as I have already mentioned, reached the heights of science, such a primitive concept is certainly surprising. Only later, in the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries, a new era emerges, the Renaissance. It is aptly named, as it witnessed a revival, including the rekindling of ancient achievements. Since then, science, culture, and the arts have progressed without major setbacks. The existence of Dark Ages always puzzled me even before I delved more deeply into history. So, I repeat, although I did not have significant objections to history, I had vague doubts and dissatisfaction. I couldn't understand how great achievements could be forgotten and then re-emerge one after another in the Middle Ages, starting from the 13th–14th centuries. Later, when I began working at the Faculty of Mechanics and Mathematics at Moscow State University, I was not professionally interested in history. However, a circumstance emerged that unexpectedly brought me back to this topic. In 1973, I accidentally came across an article by Robert Newton. Not Isaac Newton but Robert Newton. The article discussed a mysterious leap in the behavior of the second derivative of the lunar elongation. The article was published in 1972. Later, a discussion named, "The Place of Astronomy in the Ancient World" was held, organized by the Royal Society and the British Academy. The participants vigorously discussed the cause of the unexplained leap in the behavior of the Moon, discovered by Robert Newton. I briefly described the topic like this, without going into detail. I took Robert Newton's work, examined it. At that time, I was interested in celestial mechanics, attended seminars by Dmitry Ohotsymsky, a mechanical engineer and an academician, and Rumyantsev, a renowned mechanical engineer and an academician. Reading Newton's work, I noticed that the calculations of the acceleration of the Moon, the value of the so-called d double dash parameter by Robert Newton, were based on dates of ancient eclipses taken from ordinary chronology tables compiled by historians. Then I remembered hearing discussions at the Faculty of Mechanics and Mathematics that honorary academician of the USSR Academy of Sciences, the encyclopedic scholar Nikolai Morozov, dated ancient eclipses quite differently, pointing out significant errors of previous historians of astronomy. I knew that Professor Mikhail Postnikov, in his library, had Morozov's work titled, Christ. I approached him and asked for the volume where the ancient eclipses were newly dated. I obtained this volume, carefully studied the section on dating ancient eclipses, and it turned out that many ancient and medieval eclipses, with a precise and objective approach, are astronomically dated to much later epochs, significantly closer to our time than is commonly believed today. The following year, I came across a recently published overview of a scientific discussion on the issue of d double dash. My interest in this topic significantly increased. Considering the detailed research and calculations by Morozov, I began to understand that the problem likely lies in the incorrect dating of ancient eclipses by previous historians of astronomy. The discussions at the British Academy regarding Robert Newton's results did not yield a conclusive answer as to the origin of such a peculiar leap in the behavior of the Moon's acceleration. I took the dating results obtained by Morozov as a basis, recalculated the parameter d', which was computed by Robert Newton, and found that the strange leap he discovered, the discontinuity in the behavior of the Moon's acceleration, completely disappears. Thus, this purely mathematical problem in celestial mechanics is completely resolved. The mysterious leap in the behavior of the Moon disappears. There was no need to invent any new non-gravitational forces to explain such lunar behavior. The fact is that the discussions eventually led to the conclusion that since there is no explanation for this leap within the Earth-Moon system based on the currently accepted gravitational theory, there must be some other mysterious forces that allegedly manifest themselves in this strange way and cause the leap in the behavior of the Moon's acceleration somewhere around the purported 10th–11th centuries. However, there were no other arguments supporting the existence of such mysterious forces. I realized that I had managed to find a solution based on the recalculation of this parameter using Morozov dating. I did not consider myself a specialist in history, but a question arose. There is a serious confusion about historical chronology. Who is right? History or astronomy? If Morozov suggests shifting eclipse dates closer to us by hundreds of years, it is clear that this cannot pass smoothly from the perspective of the currently accepted chronology of history. I approached leading historians at our Faculty of History at Moscow State University. In particular, I talked with a renowned historian, Professor Vasily Kuzishchin. It turned out that modern historians, in general, do not engage in issues of chronology, as they themselves stated. In other words, they rely unquestioningly on tradition. In essence, historians today consider chronology a secondary, auxiliary discipline. Specifically, Kuzishchin advised me not to dig into this at all and focus on mathematics, which I was good at, leaving history to historians. It became clear to me that there was something seriously amiss with the chronology of antiquity. I became interested and started studying this issue more deeply. This took quite a bit of time. This is the very serious motivation from which our chronology research began. I started working on this in 1973–1974, quite a long time ago. Certainly, at first, I turned to the fundamentals of chronology. I began to investigate when the dates that are universally accepted today and taught in schools and universities were first established. It turned out that the works of Joseph Scaliger, a chronologist of the 16th century, lay at the foundations of the modern global chronological scheme. He wrote an extensive work on chronology in which the major events of antiquity were placed on a temporal axis and assigned dates. As it was revealed, before Scaliger, there was no unified chronological scheme. There was a chaos of different eras. Various chroniclers counted years according to different eras, and there were different calendars. In the 16th century, Scaliger and his colleagues attempted for the first time to bring order to this chaos of datings and create a global chronology, which they did. One of his students was the renowned chronologist Dionysius Petavius. He continued Scaliger's research and wrote several works. For example, his well-known 3-volume work, Refining Scaliger's Scheme, is titled Doctrina Temporum. It is a significant study in which dates are attributed to ancient events. In general, starting with Scaliger and Petavius, there was a trend of creating global chronicles. For instance, we have such a map, a historical atlas, and I am showing it in the photo. Along the timeline, the major events of antiquity are vividly, meticulously, and in detail distributed, with years assigned to them. It visually illustrates who lived earlier, who lived later, and when each war occurred. This timeline starts from the 17th century and moves backward in time, reaching beginning of the Common Era and then before Christ. This is how, in the 17th century, compilers of chronology taught students, scholars, and educated individuals what ancient history was like. What was found when I further studied this question is that there are numerous disagreements and discrepancies among chronologists and historians themselves regarding fundamental dates. For instance, the date of the Genesis is considered the most fundamental date in relation to the currently accepted scale, counting years before or after the birth of Christ. It turns out that different chroniclers and scholars dated the Genesis completely differently. According to some views, it was approximately 6,000 years BC, while others placed it closer to our time. Here is a list of the different medieval versions of the Genesis. There are many of them, more than a dozen. The key point here is that these datings, as it turns out, vary significantly. The amplitude of fluctuations in this considered most fundamental point for ancient chronology is about 2,100 years. In other words, these are versions of when the world was created, and there are about 200 different versions. It turns out that fluctuations in the starting point lead to fluctuations in the dating of all events that are dated in chronicles according to the era of the Genesis. Deciding where to place the Genesis date is not an academic question. It affects the dating of all subsequent events.
On January 10th, we will continue our conversation with Anatoly Fomenko about the history of the scientific theory, the new chronology. See you in a week.